Tonight I have a special guest, a longtime friend, and uh, very accomplished individual, Mark Weeks. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Chuck. Really honored to be here.
Oh, it's our pleasure, our pleasure. So, as you can see in this, Mark is a lawyer, a world-class fly fisherman, and more recently, a budding author. Amongst other things that he has accomplished. So, Mark, rather than me do the honors, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you come to Japan?
Uh,
That kind of
well,
thing.
as you mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing for about 33 years. I was a partner in a global law firm for more than 20 years. I ran the Tokyo office of Oric, Harrington, and Sutcliffe for more than 10 years. And I have lived in Japan 4 different times. Basically, more than half my adult life I've spent in Japan. I was an exchange student in high school, came back during college, and then I came back in the 90s to work, and then in the early 2000s, and I've sort of been here off and on ever since.
So, why Japan? Is just things just kind of uh, led into staying in Japan? Well,
Well, I was born in Alaska, but I grew up in Idaho, and which is is really the boonies. And It was even more the boonies then. This is before it became really popular. But we had an exchange student from India staying with us, and I was in junior high at the time, and she suggested that I go on an exchange program, and so I decided to look into it and took the test and whatnot, and they asked me where I wanted to go, and at the time the place that sort of held was that was most intriguing for me was Japan. This was 1977, and so I chose Japan. I really knew nothing about Japan at the time. Sort of had this image in my head of people dressed as samurai making Toyota trucks, so and TVs. Um, so I really knew next to nothing, but I was very intrigued, and I decided I wanted to go someplace just completely different from the U.S. and Japan was about as different as you could get.
so you joined your law firm in the United States, or you joined when you came to Japan?
Oh, I joined my law firm in the U.S. Yeah, I started practicing in New York in 1988, and I was there pretty much through 2004 with a hiatus where I spent about 18 months in the early 90s. Just as the bubble was bursting, actually, I interned at a Japanese law firm for 18 months. So I showed up. I know you remember that time well. When I showed up, I couldn't get a cab, and before I left, I could get a cab anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
That's that's how quickly it changed.
Yeah. It did change radically during those years, certainly. So, just for everybody who's listening, just for information, Mark had a serious knee problem, and it was bothering him for years. Um, and he was given several uh, diagnosis and prognosis, and the prognosis weren't particularly positive, and it was pretty painful and discomforting. And of course, Mark then, as now, as a world class fly fisherman, and standing up in a boat for hours at a time fly fishing was not the best thing he could do for his knee, and his knee wouldn't support him. So we started working out together, and the results were surprisingly quick. Strengthened up pretty quick, as I remember, just a few weeks. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
Amazingly so. And but what's even more amazing is, at the time I was 55, going on 56, I think, when I first contacted you, and I was thinking, if I don't do something by the time I'm 60, I'm not going to be able to stand up on a boat anymore.
Right.
And there was a meniscus surgery that I had done at one point to resolve that issue. But as a result of your training, though, I've gone from really worrying about whether I would be able to fish when I'm 60 to my legs being much stronger than I imagined in my wildest dreams they could be. At this age, uh, it's working. There's really a lot to be said for working out every day. It does amazing things, as you well know, because you're a living embodiment of that.
Well, I heard. I certainly hope that makes me feel better. I wake up in the morning feeling like I'm hit by a truck after judo practice the previous night.
Yeah, but the reason you can get to judo practice is because you're in the gym every day.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Just for people, just for edification, uh, Mark's difficulty was a floating meniscus, and which is kind of unusual. You get a lot of athletes that have the as we get older and who work their knees through different exercise regimens to the point where the meniscus, which is the cushion between the bones of the leg, starts to diminish, and then you get joint compaction, and then the cartilage gets worn away, and then you talk about artificial knee surgery, which has come a long way since even in the last 5 or 10 years. They don't have to cut away the bone; they just put caps on it. Anyways, it's much different, much easier, and much more successful than it's been in the past, and doesn't inhibit you from doing anything. Uh,
Well,
Mark,
I've been told I don't have any cartilage left. I've been told that I'm a prime candidate for a knee replacement, and yet the leg strengthening we've done has enabled me to get by without doing that, and that's really quite amazing.
yeah, it's some people the deterioration has occurred so much that they really don't have a choice. It's the only thing they can do to remedy is to replace the knee. But again, it's much easier than it used to be, and it's much less destructive to the bone. They managed to maintain the bone. They just put a titanium cap on the bones, and it essentially eliminates it. I'm sure in the next 20 or 30 years with stem cell research, they'll be able to replace the meniscus and the cartilage, but uh, I probably won't be around to see it, although Mark might. But advances in surgery and medicine, certainly. But exercise, you have to be cautious. And as when I was working with Mark, it said there's no guarantees that this will work. But if you do nothing, it's certainly going to get worse. So we might as well try some things. And fortunately, those things worked out pretty well.
Yep.
Uh, and now Mark is doing uh, a method of training called lactic acid conditioning, which for all the people out there who don't understand exercise regimens, it's probably one of the most difficult exercise regimens you can perform in a gym. Uh, you no longer count the repetitions that you do, you count minutes. So right now, Mark is up to 2 minute sets. That means basically 120 repetitions per set with 50% of his maximum contractile capacity, which is significant. In always in this training uh, with somebody like Mark, uh, it takes two. People afford the trainer a lot of credit, but in fact, to go through the training regimen that Mark has gone through requires a level of commitment that is beyond most people. Uh, Most people would not go, would not endure that level of discomfort, even though the benefits are very clear.
It's my least favorite part of the week,
And the most
but but I feel great afterwards. But as you say, the benefits, throughout the rest of the week, um, are really striking. And I recently went down to Hanako to go fishing, and we fished hard from early in the morning until dark, and we walked all over the place. And a lot of the places we were wading in had rocks, and they're slippery, and there's oyster beds, and it's just challenging wading, and not particularly good for bad knees. But I had no problem getting through both days, and I was really quite happy because in some ways it's much harder than just standing on a rocking boat because your knee is not on a rocking boat. It's all about balance, but when you're wading, in water where you can't necessarily see the bottom, you're stepping on rocks at weird angles, and your knees are getting torqued.
Yeah.
And but the muscles supported that stress. I was really happy with it.
So you just spent about how long were you in Florida fishing in the Keys?
I was there for more than 4 months, about 4 months and 10 days.
And that's an annual fishing contest?
I'm sorry, more than 3 months. Excuse me. Yeah, there's four tournaments. There's what they call the Big Three. Uh, there's the Gold Cup, which was started by the baseball great Ted Williams and some friends in the early '60s. There's the Golden Fly, which was started a few years later. I'm sorry. There's the Don Holly, which was started a few years later, and there's the Golden Fly. And there are even a few, or have been over the years, a few Japanese participants. A friend of mine, Wake-san, is really a great fisherman. He comes and fishes both the Gold Cup and the Golden Fly. In fact, this year he went above and beyond the call. He came to the U.S. in May, fished the Golden Fly, then flew back, and he lives in Osaka. So he flew back to Japan. He had to stay in a hotel for 3 days. Then he had to drive his own car home to Osaka, stay in quarantine for another 11 days. And then as soon as he got out of quarantine, he had to turn around and go back to Florida for the Gold Cup. And he fished the Gold Cup for 5 days. It's a hard tournament. It's a long tournament. And then he flew back to Narita and had to stay in a hotel again for 3 days, and had to go home to Osaka and stay in quarantine for 10 or 11 days again. And he can't take public transportation. That's why he has to drive his own car up
Right.
to Narita. He can't fly up, right? And so that's really dedication. That's everybody. There are 25 boats, so there's 25 teams, 50 participants, and all the participants were just amazed at his level of dedication, as was I, because he basically spent a month in quarantine between May and June, and was also jet lagged for while he was competing in both tournaments. And
So
there's our mentor actually, Maruhashi-san, has won the Gold Cup and the Golden Fly numerous times. He won them back in the 90s, and he's really among saltwater fly fishermen, fly anglers. He's really quite famous globally for being an amazing fly fisherman.
so in past years you've won those tournaments, right?
I won the Don Holly. Yeah, I won it last year. And there's a fourth tournament, and I've come in second twice in that tournament. And then there's a tournament here in Japan in Tokyo Bay for sea bass, a fly fishing tournament. And I won that 1 year, and I also won the Big Fish prize that year. I think I still hold the record for the biggest fish caught in that tournament. I think in 47 tournaments or something like that. There's been quite a few.
So let's see. You're a lawyer. That's a given. You're a fly fisherman, world class fly fisherman, and more recently, an author or
Right.
about to be author. So,
Yeah. It's about
so,
to get published. Yep.
so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was sort of like the tournament fishing. I realized if I didn't, I'd always wanted to write something, and I love authors like Stig Larsson, who wrote The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and
Right, right.
Scott Turow, who wrote Presumed Innocent, and James Clavell's Shogun, Hemingway, and so when I was in grade school, I entered some contests. I won 2 creative writing contests, and
Oh yeah.
so I've always if you talk to authors, many of them, most of them have sort of a similar history. And so, like my tournament fishing, I decided if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I finally sat down and started writing it, and finally, it's scheduled to be published next April. It's legal fiction. I'm sorry, legal thriller. Excuse me.
And the name of this book is?
It's called Bottled Lightning.
Okay. So what's the book about? Give us a little bit of a background without giving.
So it's basically about a lawyer in Japan who has some serious personal problems, but he has a client, a technology client who's invented this wonderful new energy technology, and he's trying to save her and the technology from people who are trying to destroy her technology.
So the story takes place in Japan primarily.
Yeah, it takes place in Japan. Most of it. Some of it takes place in the Russian Far East, and some of it takes place in Alaska, but most of it takes place in Japan. Yeah.
So how does the plot progress from Japan to Russia to? Are they
Well,
are they pursued or they are escaping or what?
well, yeah, there's both of those things exactly, and so the police are not. They are not investigating this like they should be. In other words, there are some attacks on him and on his client, and the police are not investigating it like they should be, or they're not investigating it fast enough, and so he decides he needs to take matters in his own hands to figure out who the culprits are, because he doesn't know who they are. He suspects he knows, but he doesn't. So he needs to find proof, and that's why he ends up in Russia, actually.
So this energy source, why did you choose an energy source as a quote a secret weapon or a secret technology?
Well, it's such a big topic now, right? Because we use energy in everything, in to make concrete, to make steel, to heat our homes, to cool our homes, to run our automobiles, and of course, many people believe it's contributing to climate change. And all existing energy sources have problems, right?
Right.
So fossil fuels, there's the fossil fuels generate pollution both during the extraction and also transportation. You know, you have spills and during their usage, and they create carbon dioxide. So that creates these global warming gases, and but nothing else is perfect either. You've got nuclear, which is reliable, but it creates waste, and people are concerned about accidents. And then dams, kill fish and other animals when you dam up a free-flowing river. And other sources of renewable energy like solar and wind and geothermal are not reliable enough, because sometimes the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, or
Sure.
there's not enough geothermal. So nothing's perfect. There's no perfect answer. So I thought, well, what would happen if somebody did come up with the perfect answer to this? And and that's sort of where the story comes from.
There have been a few movies in the recent past. I just watched one last night where called Night and Day with Cameron Diaz and I forget the actor's name. Tom Cruise. And,
Oh,
and they had a battery that would small little battery that would power a city kind of thing, and then exploded. And then there was the one with Keanu Reeves where they created this constant energy. And anyway,
yeah, that was Chain Reaction,
right,
right? About
right,
fusion technology, right?
right. You don't hear so
And
much
the
about fusion technology lately. And what?
Well, the joke, I did a lot of research on this, and the joke about fusion is it's 30 years away, and it always will be. And and they've been saying this joke for like 50 years, evidently. Um, so who knows? May come about at one point. And then there's also hydrogen, but there are other issues with hydrogen. So nothing is perfect,
Right.
and I chose lightning because lightning's really fascinating. I've experienced it up close and personal, too close while fishing. But it generates so much energy. It generates more heat than the sun,
Ah,
and just one bolt could run an incandescent light bulb. I think for a year, or it's not just one. For a year, 24/7. So, and the other interesting thing about lightning is scientists know generally why it occurs, but they don't really know the exact process, and even now. And so, exactly what is triggering it. So I thought, well, if somebody could actually figure that out, and you could generate lightning on demand, then you would have limitless amounts of energy, and you could scale it, right? If you could have, if you could figure out how to do it. At will, it didn't necessarily have to be done by utility. You could have a little unit that powers your house, for example, or you
uh,
could have one that runs a car factory. So that was very intriguing to me. But it's just a cool lightning's just a really cool thing.
so getting into the character development of this, you had some. The characters are biracial.
Yes, the lawyer is his father was Japanese and his mother was white American. She was a lawyer, and his client is the reverse. Her father's white American and her mother uh, is Japanese.
Any reason you chose to include that?
Well, it's I don't think it's a I haven't seen a lot of writing in fiction about biracial uh, characters, at least between Japan and the U.S. Um, and my son is biracial, and I have many friends, including my girlfriend's children are both biracial, and so I saw my son grow up in the U.S. and deal with certain issues there as a biracial child, and then I've talked to him about working in Japan and how you're sort of betwixt and between no matter where you are. But there are certain advantages to it too. So there's definitely pros and cons, and I just found that a fascinating um, idea for a character.
All right. So is and are you have you got anybody to publish it yet, or how have you solved that problem?
Yeah, we do have a publisher, and we're working on the cover now. Like I said, it's scheduled to come out in April. So there's just still a lot to do. I had no idea how much work there was involved in this, but got to get the cover design done and then get the internal layout done, and then you have to figure out how you're going to market it, both on Amazon as an ebook and then also soft cover and hard cover. That's all sort of inside baseball discussion, but there's actually quite a lot to do once you've written it, and writing is all about rewriting, so you end up rewriting more times than you can count. But once that's all done, then you have all this work to do to get it published.
Right. So there are no motorcycles in this one.
No, actually, there are. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it opens with a motorcycle scene. Actually.
One of the things that Mark and I share are a love of motorcycles. Uh, and I have two, one little one and one big one. And actually, have just recovered from a minor accident. So I think Mark can attest to the hazards of motorcycle riding as much as the hazards of fly
Well,
fishing.
anybody who knows the very complicated Tokyo expressway system will recognize it in the book.
I
Um,
bet, yeah.
yeah, because there's a lot of action that occurs on the motorcycle actually.
Okay.
And as
What?
you know, there's a rich history of Bosozoku and Yankees and
Yeah, yeah.
people racing. You know, the Rurettozoku, people racing around the circuit, which, as you know, I think it was built in time for the 1964 Olympics, as I recall. So it's the oldest part of the system, and as a result, it tends to be, narrow, and there's lots of off ramps and on ramps, and they're basically 90-degree turns, and they're short, and there's tunnels. The lighting's constantly changing, and yet people race around this thing, particularly at night, right? Uh, I'm
Yep.
sure you've seen those guys, and then they gather in the rest areas and look at each other's cars and motorcycles, and of course everybody's 40 years younger than we are at least, and they
At least.
and they race, because they're racing around at 3 o'clock in the morning, so they won't attract attention, right?
Right, right. Yeah,
And I remember years ago, I used to go to these rest areas, drive there like on a warm evening, and they were packed with nothing but muscle cars and motorcycles, and people got their hoods up and looking at their engines and looking at their bikes and playing bad music, and they had the lighting, those lights that people put on their cars, and running lights, and yeah, it was quite a scene.
I bet. I bet. But so you had a BMW, right? A big, very.
Yes, yeah. I had a BMW K1200 LT,
Yeah,
which
that's
was a wonderful bike.
yeah. There's been some tremendous advantages now. The big bikes are just getting bigger and bigger. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 2000 cc. How crazy is that? Remember back in the day when we thought 750 was
yeah,
massive,
I,
and now 1600, 2000. That's just crazy.
I remember back in when I was living in Kyoto. This was wow. This was a while ago. It was almost 40, this is 50 years ago when the first 750 CB 750 came out.
Great
Uh,
bike.
it's just a wonderful bike. Uh, but I can go into my own dialogue about how many accidents I had on that bike.
Well, that's the thing is, inevitable. It's like skiing, right? Inevitably, there's going to be an accident.
Yeah,
But these bigger, faster bikes. I mean, you could pull a boat, Chuck, with some of these bikes.
yeah,
It's just um, so much power, and they're very. Of course, it's all about cool, right? I mean, nobody needs to drive a motorcycle. I guess maybe a moped is faster, and they're just beautiful. They're just works of art. I remember years ago at the Guggenheim Museum in New York even had a whole exhibit on motorcycles as art. Um, just took over the whole museum. and so they're gorgeous. But wow, with the power, you just really have to be careful. That's all I can say. Wear your helmet.
Yeah, tell me about it. The
Helmets save lives.
the History Channel had an article on the Honda Gold Wing, which is an
Yeah.
800 cc cubic centimeter motorcycle, shaft drive, and they touted that. Well, this was a few years ago as the literally the best motorcycle from all aspects ever made. Uh, but again,
Now
that's
I disagree with that,
well,
but
that was just 2 years ago. You got to realize that was 2 years ago. That was wow. How many? Probably about 10 years ago. At that
yeah,
time, it was good, and now they have motorcycles that don't fall over. Matter of fact, the
yeah,
BMW,
because they got those gyroscopes in them, right?
yeah, it's just
So you pull up at the stoplight. You don't have to put your foot down.
right, right.
That's that's pretty badass. Can I say that on a podcast? Doc?
Oh, sure.
That, that
You say whatever you
that's pretty
want.
cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Yeah, but it's not just the motorcycles; it's the drivers. And I have a 1300 Honda, which is kind of built on the basis of the Harley extended forks kind of thing. It's not that extreme, but it's you got a fat bob tire on the back. It's a very nice, stable, great bike. Not very popular because the handlebars are so far in front of you. It's tough to
Yeah,
turn or whatever. But I also have a little 125 cc bike for getting around town. And even though I drive, oh, okay, I drive to get where I'm going fast. You got to be careful. But some of these well, I'll say kids, they're 15, 16, 17, and they have these 120. Unbelievable what these kids will do. And it's just scary. And you see them, bicycles, but it seems like there's almost a daily accident.
yeah,
Uh, and it's the cars. Sure, the cars are not aware. Sometimes they can't see the bike because they're unaware of the bike, but the bike is just doing some really crazy stuff. Going
yeah,
down the middle lane between cars and they
yeah,
misjudge. Yeah, just serious stuff. Yeah, the little bike.
yeah. I used to be that guy.
Yeah,
Um, remember back in the day when they had the rectangle in front of the cars and the motorcycles? It said like Jido Nidin Senyo or something,
right,
and just for motorcycles, and so you could pull in front of the. They've done away with all those now, but
right,
at the bigger intersections, right? And I went to school way out in Western Tokyo, and but I worked. I had jobs, in city center, so I would drive in, and then on my way home in the evening, um, you'd hit one of those intersections and get in that rectangle. You, of course, lane split right all the way up to get there,
right.
and then inevitably all these other motorcycles would pull up next to you, and somebody would start revving their engine, and it was off to the races. It was just silliness. I can remember racing all the way from Roppongi to Mitaka, the same person who I don't know. I don't even know this guy, and all of a sudden we're racing, right? And lane splitting, and I mean sometimes, I guess the statute of limitations is run on this, but driving up on the sidewalk and just crazy stuff. I really dodged a bullet, I must say.
Well, a lot of it is certainly the drivers are certainly responsible, and being able to see a small motorcycle 125, you're kind of, but it's also the road conditions are not really conducive to. There's a lot of debris on the roads. You get a little bit of snow, and people put change in their tires for Tokyo, and it grinds up the asphalt, so it's this gritty sand-like substance on the side of the road, very slippery. And if it rains, you have to go between the crosswalks because they're not just painted; they've got this coating and
Yeah, they get slippery. Yeah,
yeah, and manholes, and a lot of the roads on an extreme curve are banked the wrong way. So yeah, you really have to know the road and the road conditions to drive without accident. And
Yeah.
then and just people do stupid stuff, especially weekends when people that's the only time they drive is on Saturday and Sunday, if they drive at all, and so they're not aware. Anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. So in the book, you've got a lot of. Have you devoted a lot of time to? Does the hero drive the motorcycle, or
Yes. Yeah.
and what
Of
what
course.
of
Of
course
course. Yeah.
what size is his bike?
Well, it's big too. I mean, it's not a 125.
That wouldn't fit the hero image.
What kind of question is that?
Yeah, when I ride my 125, somebody said you look like one of those bears in a Russian circus on a little
Right.
on a little
Yeah.
bicycle.
I didn't want my character being that guy. So yeah. Um, yeah, and there's bad guys on motorcycles too, and they have different motorcycles. So um, actually, that required a lot of rewriting to make it work. Because if you write too much, then it can get slow and boring. And of course, it's supposed to all be happening very fast. And
Yeah.
so that was very interesting because I would go out and I'd drive someplace, and then I'd write about that and try to reflect what I felt while I was riding the motorcycle through the written word on the page, and getting that balance just right really took some time.
Yeah, I remember when I read one of the first drafts that you asked me to read, and I mentioned there's a lot of information about the motorcycle, but I'd like to know
Yeah,
about the characters a bit. But I think that changed a bit.
yeah. That chapter is actually no longer in the book, but my editor at one point in time said this was several manuscripts ago, but one of his comments was less motorcycle fetishness. I'll, I'll never. He wrote, he sent me written comments, and that was one of his. He's like, this is very clear, but I don't think your reader needs this much. And then he wrote less motorcycle fetishness, and that was a pretty clear comment.
So, when is the book coming out?
April. It should be out in April 22nd. Yeah.
So, when I first read the book, there's a lot about the motorcycle, but the basic plot was there. It hadn't been developed to the point that we're discussing tonight, but I said it'd be a great movie, and it sounds like a great movie. It sounds like it made for a movie.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, I think it would be a lot of fun because there is a lot of action in it, and the places where it takes place are very cinematic, like the racing and basically running away from the bad guys on the expressway, and then in the office buildings here in Tokyo, some of which are the newer ones are really quite dramatic the way they're designed, all glass, for example, and obviously the Russian Far East. I mean, the Russian Far East is perhaps the most wild place on the planet anymore. It's roughly the size. It runs from the border with North Korea up along the border with China, and then wraps around, includes Kamchatka, and goes all the way to Alaska, right? And all that territory is roughly the size of Alaska, northern Canada. I'm sorry, Western Canada, and the northwestern U.S., including Northern California. But it's only got about 6 million people in it. So it's really wild. Most places there aren't roads, so the only way to get around is by helicopter. The winters are brutal, and everything freezes.
Have you visited those places?
What's that?
Have you visited those places?
Oh yeah, I've been there many times. Yeah, all for fishing, and it's just really giant bears, um, lots of animals, rivers no one's ever heard of that are just giant, log jams on the rivers that will be a mile long and completely change the course of the river until eventually those get washed away. And it's really the wild wild east there.
Huh.
And yet it's also Europe in the east because it was settled by white Russians.
Right.
And so when you go there, it has this European feel to it, and yet it's further east than China, for example, parts of it.
Right.
So really quite a fascinating place, and the history is also very uh, interesting, really fascinating.
Well, you're gonna publish this. You get somebody else to publish it. But I think you mentioned at one time in our conversations you were thinking of starting a publishing company.
Yeah, yeah, I'm still thinking about that because I've got some other authors I know who are writing, and the it's become easier than ever before because of technology, like a lot of things, to publish directly. And indie publishing is giving traditional publishing a real run for its money. Um, and I think it's very soon. I think a lot of authors are going to start wondering why they're going through traditional publisher at all when they can do it all themselves. It's sort of a hollowing out of the industry because of the technology.
Well, I
Most
remember.
books are sold on Amazon anyway.
Yeah, um, I wrote. I've had 6 books published, but they weren't stories. They're about fitness and health and whatever, uh,
Nonfiction.
nonfiction. And but I mean, I wrote the first one and the second one, and then had it translated, and then the other 4 were I verbalized, and they wrote it and produced it and sold it. Uh, the first one did all right, but the other ones, there's I forget how many. There's something like 10 to 15,000 books published a year in Japan, novels. Have you heard that?
I don't know the number, but what's interesting is you can self-publish in Japan now too, and that's become easier than ever before. Of course, you've got to get somebody to. If you wrote it in English first, you have to get it translated into Japanese.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I understand that the publishing, the way it works is you write the book, or whether it's in Japanese or you have it translated, and then the reason you go to a publisher because they are also connected to the bookstores that sell it.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Historic, Historically, that's the way it was. That's less true now. In the U.S., perhaps the biggest reason to go to a publisher is credibility, and that's true with the bookstores, but also, and I don't mean to go too inside baseball here, but if you want to get it on the New York bestsellers list, for example, you really have to get it published through a self-publisher to do that. It's really hard without going through it. I'm sorry, you have to go through a traditional publisher to do that. It's really hard to do that as a self-publisher.
right.
And in publishing, like I've learned, like anything else, it's really a lot of it's about who you know, um, and if you've got a traditional publisher, it's easier to get connected to Oprah Winfrey or somebody like that who will introduce your book on national TV.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Right.
so those it's but a lot. What I've realized is what I've learned is even if you're published through a traditional publisher, unless you're John Grisham or somebody like that, where they give you, or Stephen King, where they give you a big advance every time you write a book, they're not going to do any marketing for you for the most part. You've got to
Oh,
do it yourself anyway.
oh,
So so that's another reason that I think more and more authors are wondering why they're going with traditional publishers. Plus, if you go with a traditional publisher, you have to pay an agent a fee, and then you're just getting, you're just getting a royalty. It's not like you're getting all the profits.
Yeah, and
Um,
the books that I wrote or had written, um, again, final say so. Reading the book, make sure it was the way I wanted the information out to. But the INZE, the amount
right.
that you get is like something like 5 or 6%. So the publishers and the bookstores take the lion's share.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
a lot of people publish to get their name out there, and so I don't know. I've been away from that situation for so long now. I'm not really aware of it. So
Well, for with nonfiction, like you say, a lot of people are publishing a book to get their name out there and to help with their business somehow, right? So, and particularly in Japan, but not just Japan, but particularly in Japan, if you're a consultant or somebody who's selling a service, saying that you published a book about whatever area, in your case, fitness, for example, that gives you credibility.
yeah, I understood that. That's why I did it. That's why I did it. And at that time, this was a while ago, uh, 20 more than that, probably 30, 35 years ago. It was basically a how-to kind of thing. Not too much on theory, just how to do the exercises, what you should. And there was nobody else out there doing that. So it was unique in that regard. Sold well and created, again, helped the business a great deal and added to your credibility. So this is going to go out. This is coming out in April next year. So have
Right.
you got the next? Are you going to continue with this? I mean, you've got your book because you're.
Yeah, I have a second one I'm working on, which is also a novel, but it's completely different. It's that's about tournament fishing, and when in the Florida Keys, which has a long fishing history, I should say, there are so many stories, Chuck, that you would not believe the trouble that fishermen get into.
I heard about this. One person went fishing, and the fish. It was very dangerous water because there were sharks in the water as well,
Yeah,
and fish pulled the fishing rod out of his hands, and
yeah,
and he dove in after his fishing rod.
yeah.
I,
No.
I heard. Did you hear about this guy?
Yeah. That I'm guilty as charged. We we were in blue water. We were trying to catch these tuna. We were chasing this school of tuna, and we ended up hooking these yellowfin tuna, and these ocean whitetips were coming in and eating our tuna, and so we didn't want to be feeding sharks, tuna. So we moved to another area, and we hooked up again. They were good sized fish, 10 to 15, you know, 5 to 7 kilos, I would say, and maybe a little larger. And sure enough, the shark showed up, and you could see him. The water was crystal clear, so you could see him down there, and they're all lit up. And so my friend, his fish gets bit in half, and then I'm trying to horse this fish in, and uh, and a shark came in and grabbed my fish and stopped, and I was sort of doing a tug of war with it, and the shark all of a sudden raced off, and I bobbled the rod, and it fell overboard, and it it was straight up and down the water with the reel right near the surface, and once the tension was off, the shark stopped, and so the rod was just sitting there for a moment, and I thought, oh, this is my chance, and so without thinking, I dove out of the boat, and as I was in the air, even before I hit the water, I thought, this is not a good idea. And to add insult to injury, just as my hands were about to touch the reel, the rod straightened out and went shooting through the water, and never to be seen. And so I didn't even get it. Now I'm in the water, and the guide was, I don't even think he knew how to react. And um, so he said, Mark, I suggest you get back in the boat right away, which I did. Um, but yeah, that's just one of many stories, both on land and off land, of anglers and guides doing stupid things.
Well, I think we've all done some change the scenario. We've all done some foolish things.
Well, and the thing is that I think those ocean white tips, they were like, 7, 8 feet long. So it's not like, we were dealing with 12-foot long fish or something like that. But still, there were several of them around, and all of a sudden they were all lit up. Of course, they were all lit up because, you know, they've been eating these fish. And so you could end up with a ugly feeding frenzy situation. And I think the only thing that saved me was the fish we were catching were 5, to 7 kilos. And here I jump in and I'm 100 kilos, and it was obviously a big splash. So I think for a moment they didn't know how to react, right? Because I was not the same size as their prey.
Right,
I think if I spent very much time in the water at all, they would have started. You know how they come in and they nudge you and start exploring, right?
right.
And see, and I think it really could have been bad
Oh
if
yeah,
I had.
oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
think that
and we
that goes without saying.
and we were in the middle of nowhere. We were like a day away from a hospital, a day away by boat and airplane from a hospital. So even if I hadn't been eaten, if it was a bad injury involving a lot of bleeding,
Yeah.
it would not have been good. It was not a smart move at all. But
Well, sometimes when you do things without thinking, you don't consider the
yeah,
smartness or not. Yeah, I've been there, done that. So, what other projects you working on? I mean, you're writing a book. You've got your law practice. You're in the process of you're leaving Japan now.
yeah. I'm next week. Hopefully not permanently. I plan on coming back at some point next year.
Oh well, that's good. That's good. So, any other plans? I mean, you've got a second book in the works. You've got your law practice uh,
Well, I'm going to compete again next year, and
in Florida.
in Florida, and I'm trying to catch a world record, which is sort of the never-ending story. I did. There's one in particular that I really want to catch, but it's the bar is really high because people have been catching these world records for decades, and so um, to beat the current world record, you really have to catch a large fish and on fly. This is a world record on fly, and so it's sort of it would be a lifetime achievement if I got it because the fish would be over 90 kilos to get the record.
All right. Well, great. Well, geez, because great talking to you, Mark. I wish you all the success in the world. I hope your book does well.
Thank you
Bottled,
very much.
bottled lightning.
Bottled lightning. Yep.
Of course, I expect a copy, to review. So,
Yep. Yep. Well, you'll of course get a copy. Yeah, I'm happy to. More than happy. Whether you'll actually want it or not may be a different issue.
so you can say, well,
But
but oh, you're the one that bought the book, right? Okay.
yeah, you're the one, right? You're the one person who bought the book and left a review on Amazon. Yeah. Other than my mother,
Uh,
so there'll be 2 reviews.
well, look, I wish you all the luck in the world. I'm sure. I mean, it sounds like a great novel, and I'm sure you'll get uh, calls to make a movie out of it. It just has
Well, thank you so much.
it's all the excitement and the fighting and the energy systems and romance, all the things that movies are made of lately. So I'm sure it'll be okay.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because my publicist, after she read it, she said, "Is this energy? Is this system real? Does this really exist?" And that was really nice because I did do a huge amount of research into it, and of course it's all creative, you know, it's all science fiction basically. But
Yeah.
I did go into some cinematic detail, so to speak, about how it works and what it does, and there's a whole demonstration, and so it was nice to have somebody say, is this real technology? Which of course it's not.
Well, it could be. You never know. You never know how these things work out.
If somebody figures out how to generate lightning on demand, it could be a thing. Yeah.
Well, the appeal of good science fiction is because there is a strong possibility it could be
Yeah.
realized. And
Yeah.
I mean, look at what we have now. We have of walking wristbands and telephones and we have all the things that were like in Dick Tracy novels when I was a kid.
Well, and it's really hard to get it all right. I mean, you can get a lot right, but you ever read that book Neuromancer? So Neuromancer came out
Yes,
in the
yes, I
'80s.
did.
So it was where the phrase cyberspace was first coined.
Oh, is that
Was
right?
used in that science fiction novel, which is a great book, and most of that takes place in Japan. Um,
Ah,
and and the guy he nailed a lot about. Of course, this is before the internet was really a thing, other than out inside of colleges or between college campuses back in the '80s. And he got so much of it right about cybersecurity. I'm sorry, cyberspace and just the internet and connectivity and it said and how it was going to change the world. I mean, he just nailed it. But even the author acknowledges one thing he missed. So if you read the novel, um, the main character on more than one occasion is making a phone call on a public phone, right? Well, um, one thing he missed, and he of course says he missed this, was cell phones and smartphones. He had no idea that was going to happen, right? And so of course nobody in a modern science fiction movie would be on a payphone, right? And I
right.
saw Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, the other day, which is almost 40 years old. It was made in 1982, and that is a brilliant movie. It holds up actually quite well because of the way it's made. It's really quite well done. But at one point in time, he's on a payphone,
Ah, that's
right?
Harrison Ford. That was Harrison Ford.
Harrison Ford, he's on a payphone, right? And meanwhile, it's supposed to be in the future where um, people are living off world, and I guess Mars has been terraformed or whatever, right? And here he is. It's a fancy payphone. It's a very high tech payphone, but it's still a payphone.
And there were a lot of robotics in that.
A lot of cool robotics. And the interesting thing about the cell phone issue, though, is Dick Tracy actually, from decades earlier, was decades ahead of its
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah,
With the watch,
right, exactly.
and I actually was fishing with a friend of mine, and we were looking down in the river from this bridge. This is here in Japan, and we saw these fish down below the bridge, and he had one of those Apple watches, right?
Right,
So the problem was when you went down under the bridge and were looking, at water level, basically, you couldn't see where the fish were, and they were moving around. So
right.
I stayed on the bridge, and he went down below the bridge, and he turned on his iWatch or whatever they call it, and I had my iPhone on, and then I was guiding him. He was listening through his watch, and I would say, "Okay, throw to the right, 10 meters, or another couple meters, you know, uh, 5 meters to the left, a little further, right?" So to get him into the school, which was swimming around. I mean, that's just incredible, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
his hands are free because he's listening through his watch,
right.
right? Uh, and I mean, right? Exactly. So you think about 10 years ago. I mean, when did that come out? The Apple Watch? Is that 5 years old, or
About 5 years old. Yeah.
yeah,
And of course,
it's amazing. It's amazing.
technology is improving all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've talked a lot about it. I wish you all the luck.
Thank you
And,
very much.
and I'll see you at the next workout, either tomorrow or the next day, depending on your schedule.
Yeah, I'll be in touch.
All right, buddy. Well,
Hey, thanks very much,
thank you
Chuck.
for joining us tonight. I'm sure that the listeners enjoyed it, and it'll be recorded and archived, so we can have other people tune in and check it out. I hope your book takes off. I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ears. Thanks again.
Uh, okay, buddy. You take care. Well, again, thanks again for
Okay,
showing up. Appreciate it.
my pleasure. Good
Okay.
night.
Good night.
Bye.